The last session on our program is with Walfredo Toscanini, who is the grandson of Arturo Toscanini, and Harvey Sachs, a well-known writer and expert on Toscanini, as well as on many, many other topics. And as a last-minute substitute for Simonetta Puccini, who is ailing, we are very, very lucky to have with us Cheryl Green, the great grandniece of David Belasco. Let's welcome them all.
I think the most obvious thing to begin with, given who the two principal guests are here, is to ask what is known about the actual, if anything, about the actual personal relationships between, or rather among, Toscanini, Belasco, and Puccini. Walfredo, would you like to start off with that?
Is this on? Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, at this time, the Puccini family had gone through some great troubles, and they were very close to the Toscanini family. And there are many letters of Puccini thanking my grandmother and my grandfather both for making his stay here in New York during the Fanciulla production such a pleasant, such a good time. Really affectionate, really totally free of that rancor which occasionally happened between Puccini and Toscanini when Puccini heard something that Toscanini had said, or Toscanini heard that Puccini had said something about him, and all of a sudden they wouldn't be speaking to each other. But this was quite the opposite, and I think for my grandfather, from the conductor's point of view, it was a pretty ideal situation. He didn't have to guess what the composer intended here. He could turn around and say, Giacomo, should this be changed? Should we try this? Does this sound better? And get an opinion. And I think with David Belasco, there seemed to be a mutual respect and mutual, really, enthusiasm for what Belasco could do on a stage with the effects, all his great ideas for the stage, which sometimes grandfather would have had to have tried to do himself if there wasn't any good director on the stage. He would then start to move the people around and do that. But this was done, and so I think grandfather said he saw the music as the protagonist of the opera. And he said it's one beautiful, long tone poem from beginning to end. He liked the direction that Puccini was taking the music. And the lack of set arias in the performance. So I think he enjoyed the music. He loved it. He sat and marked up these rehearsal scores, and in fact, they became the printed scores largely. And as far as Belasco, I think Italy had a great love affair with all things Western. Bret Hart, Buffalo Bill show. All the kinds of things that were this romanticized West. The Italians really liked it, and so they were happy to be doing this, quote, American opera, which turns out to be less American probably, but nevertheless was meant to be in the direction of American opera.
I think it's significant that Belasco gave that copy of the Girl of the Golden West typescript to your grandfather and signed it to him and so on. That yes. Is now, you can see it out in the display case here. Cheryl, what's your take on this relationship?
Well, it was Belasco's parents. If they hadn't come from the City of London, we might not have been sitting here today. There might have been a different scenario. The story might have been the wild west of London, the City of London, in the banking district. with the hedge funds and what have you. But yes, they made their way. When they emigrated, they were in awe of gold rush fever. And so she must have been about 7 months pregnant, Mrs. Belasco, his mother. And they journeyed from, as I say, across the pond, the Atlantic, and headed on horseback through the Isthmus of Panama. But I don't know how she could have done that, he was born in 1853, so she was heavily pregnant. She must have been sitting side saddle on the horse. And so they made their way, and he was miraculously born 2 months later after they left the City of London. And so that's part of the story that I know.
What about the specific direct contact with Toscanini and Puccini? Do you have anything to add to what's been said already about that, or from your own family knowledge, or is that about the extent of the information?
Well, I know that he wrote a golden score. He left out the title, "The Girl of the Golden West," when it became La Fanciulla del West. But he certainly wrote a golden score, as I've written in my essay at fanciulla100.org.
Okay. Were you about to say something?
No.
Oh, I thought you were about to say
Give
something.
the word to our
Moderator.
expert.
Yeah, there is so much to be said about the relationship specifically between Toscanini and Puccini, which began in the sort of early to mid 1890s. Toscanini was about 8.5 years younger than Puccini, who in turn was about 5 years or 5.5 years younger than Belasco. They were all more or less contemporaries. And Toscanini was a young up-and-coming conductor just at the same time as Puccini was a young up-and-coming composer. In fact, Toscanini mentions, I'm just now working on a complete rewrite of my biography of Toscanini, and one of the main tasks is transcribing tapes of conversations that took place in Toscanini's last years that were recorded by his son, Walfredo's father. And in one of them he mentions specifically that their careers began at the same time, that Le Villi, I believe, was 1885, the first opera, and Toscanini graduated from the Parma Conservatory in 85 and began his conducting career in 86. So they're very closely parallel. And some of the, I think as early as 1894, letters between Toscanini and Puccini used the familiar tu form, which didn't come about as easily in those days as it does today. So they were already, on very close musical and personal terms. There were lots of periods of dissension, as Walfredo alluded to before, between the two of them over the years, but the period of Fanciulla was a particularly warm period between them. Later on, the First World War, especially 1914, your Aunt Vali told the story about the family being at the beach at Viareggio, and just as war was breaking out, First World War was breaking out, and Puccini said, well, now the Germans will come and organize this country finally. And Toscanini, who was very anti-German and pro-Italian, walked away and wouldn't speak to him for a week. There were all sorts of incidents like that. I mean, they were both very high-strung and in some ways hard to get along with characters. So I think you should actually tell the panettone incident.
Yeah, one time, again, when they would have these breakups, came at Christmas time, and the the exchange of gifts had been sort of a regular thing, and so at the just before Christmas at the Toscanini household, a large panettone arrived from the Puccinis, and the next day a telegram arrived from Puccini to Toscanini in the cryptic words and short phrases of that time. Puccini had thought, "Oh my God, he thinks I'm trying to I'm apologizing to him for the last fight we had." So he wrote, "Panettone sent by mistake. Stop, Puccini." And the next day in Torre del Lago, Puccini received a telegram, "Panettone eaten by mistake. Stop, Toscanini." So even though they were theoretically on opposite sides of various issues, I remember another time that someone told grandfather that Puccini had grandfather was recording, was preparing Boito's Nerone posthumously to be presented La Scala, and someone reported to him that Puccini had said, "Why does he waste time with music like that when he could be doing another Manon Lescaut or Tosca?" And grandfather heard that, and when Puccini showed up for the rehearsal, the final rehearsal of Nerone, he was barred from entering La Scala by Toscanini. So these things really went to the zenith, but when they were close together, I think there was a great deal of real affection and admiration of each other's work and of Belasco's work, way beyond a normal relationship. It was really heightened.
Yeah, it was like a family, it was like a family, in fact, with all the ups and downs of, in a way, almost brotherly combat.
Like soulmates.
Yes, yeah, they had their ups and downs throughout those years, and of course it was at the very end of Puccini's life, which was just shortly after the Nerone incident, which hurt Puccini very much, that Toscanini learned that Puccini was, in fact, in very poor health and possibly dying, and went to visit him at Viareggio and listened to the Turandot. He played through as much of it as he had completed. And so there was peace again between them at the very end. And I think that your grandmother actually went to Brussels to be with Puccini, yes. Did she not?
Yes, with the Puccini family. When unfortunately Puccini was operated on and died. And this is not very well known, but there was nothing ready when Puccini's body was to be returned to Italy. There was nothing ready in Torre del Lago or anything, because this was very unexpected. But we had the Toscanini family had built in 1905 a chapel in Milan, so that actually Puccini's body rested there until something suitable was prepared for him in Torre del Lago. So he was together.
Yeah. I think actually the best thing at this point is to open this to, questions and comments, because I'm sure that a lot of you are have things that you would like to ask Walfredo or Cheryl or even me.
I wonder if Toscanini conducted any other Puccini premieres beside Fanciulla.
Yes, they worked together on the Bohème. On the Bohème, and grandfather was the conductor of the Turin Orchestra, and I guess Ricordi wanted to open it out of town. They were not sure if it was going to be a success or not, so they were happy to, instead of Milan, opening it in Turin, and they worked together a great deal, the same way they did on Fanciulla, on La Bohème. And also the more modern staging, more modern acting on stage, more natural singing. It was great cooperation.
Yeah, of course, Toscanini also conducted then the world premiere of Turandot in 1926, 2 years after Puccini's death. But Bohème is very interesting because there are letters of Puccini's to Ricordi. At first he didn't want Toscanini because he apparently had felt the lash of his tongue at some point on other productions that they had done together, and he refers to him as a, I forget, something like a, burbero or something like that, an unpleasant person. He would have preferred Mugnone at first, who was a actually better known conductor at that time. Toscanini was only 29, not yet 29 years old at the beginning of 1896. But then, once rehearsals began, Puccini writes to Ricordi that Toscanini is he's very pleasant to work with, and he's a wonderful conductor, and couldn't have asked for anything better. So, but those were the three operas that Toscanini conducted the world premieres of. He also did the Milan premiere of Tosca. And Puccini, there are letters to suggest that Puccini originally wanted Toscanini to conduct the world premiere of that, but Ricordi wanted the world premiere to take place in Rome, where the opera is set, and Toscanini was the conductor at La Scala at that point, so that did not work. And I believe he also conducted the premiere of the new edition of Madama Butterfly after the revision, the revision after the failure of the Scala 1904 production. And he certainly conducted it later, a very early production of Butterfly in South America, in Buenos Aires. So, I think Manon certainly also was an opera. He did not conduct the premiere of that in '93, but he conducted it very soon after it was written, and I think it was one of his very favorite Puccini operas. He used when they reopened La Scala after the Second World War, the sort of pièce de résistance was the intermezzo in the third act of Manon Lescaut at that performance. Yes.
Yes. First of all, Signor Toscanini, I want you to know that I visited your family chapel in Milan, and I was very surprised to see that there was a crypt in there for Vladimir Horowitz, who was a family member, was he not?
Yes.
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 But my question is, I was wondering why Mugnone was chosen to conduct the world premiere of Butterfly rather than Toscanini.
Shall I answer that?
Please.
I don't think it was Mugnone. I think it was Campanini who conducted it. Yeah, it was Campanini. What?
It was
Campanini. Because, yes, Toscanini had left La Scala at the end of the 1902-1903 season. He had a big fight with the management and he left. And the production was scheduled to take place at La Scala anyway. So at that point, Toscanini was simply no longer there. And Campanini, who was the conductor for, I believe, 2 seasons or maybe only 1 season, had the dubious honor in that case of conducting what became a scandalous failure. And in one of the conversation tapes, Toscanini, who was in Milan at the time but did not attend, talks about how he sat at home waiting for Sormani, who had been his assistant conductor and was then Campanini's assistant conductor, to come see him afterwards and tell him how the performance had gone.
It's also my understanding that at Puccini's funeral, Toscanini conducted the funeral march from Edgar.
That's correct,
Yes.
and it was one of the very, very few times that Toscanini ever conducted anything in a church. It was in the Duomo di Milano, the Milan Cathedral.
Hi. Could one of you perhaps say something about what we know of Toscanini's relationship to his production people at La Scala and the Met? Of course, the productions would have been naturalistic, and presumably followed the specifications in the score. But if I have no sense really of how much direct contact he had, say, with a director, if there was a director even, or whether it was basically in his hands when productions were coming into play in either of those theaters.
One of the reasons grandfather felt a great debt to Boito was that Boito sort of got him a contract with La Scala, which practically said you can do whatever you want. So he did interface with the scenic design, with the directors, with everybody else. And in the absence of the director doing things, he'd jump in and he would leave the house in the morning, spend the whole day in the theater, and come home at night and go to bed. So when he was doing a production, he would be totally immersed in that production, and no detail would escape him. So I think he was very much involved with all the production staff.
He specifically mentioned in one of these conversations about the Met, how old-fashioned the Met's sets were when he arrived there in 1908. And apparently they were still using, the painted backdrops, which of course were flats, which were used for a long time thereafter. But, they would have, the forest that could be used in 5 or 6 different operas. And he, for Gluck, I'm not sure whether it was for Orfeo or Armide, both of which he conducted at the Met, he actually had sets imported from Paris, and felt that this was very important to do things in a new way. And of course, most notably during his time at La Scala in the 20s, in 1923, he engaged Adolphe Appia to direct the Tristan there, which was totally revolutionary at the time. It was one of the few occasions that Appia actually had to apply his theories to practical situation. And on the one hand, Toscanini was certainly not a situation like the Kroll opera in Berlin, which was much more avant-garde and so on, but he was looking for new solutions to productions of not only Wagner but everything that he conducted. He did not want just standard stand-around productions. He wanted drama. He wanted theater.
I have a question, if you don't mind. I just wanted to know about Belasco a little bit. What was, I know he was a real character and so forth. He actually lived over the theater at the Belasco Theater, and I wonder if we could hear a little bit about what that place was like where he lived and what his life was like there.
Well, I was lucky enough to actually go up there, invite from the Schubert Theatre management, and it's a fantastic experience to wander around the 10-room duplex apartment. And but unfortunately, I would love to see it in its full former glory, because now it's just a shell. There were 1 or 2 sad relics of his reminders of his what it was like, but unfortunately, somebody didn't think ahead, and they put in a snake-like air duct, which is asbestos, which is very dangerous to remove. He had a wonderful fireplace that was taken from the Granada, the tiles, and Alhambra Palace, and just the whole apartment, it goes up some stairs into a galleried landing, and that's where he used to entertain his actresses, and also have meals brought. He had a little pantry, and his room where he slept had sliding velvet walls, that depicted scenes of Madame Butterfly or the Japanese landscape.
That's fascinating.
Could you tell us?
Plus, he had a lock of Napoleon's hair up there because he was fascinated by Napoleon, and the chaise lounge of Josephine, and also a chair that Henry VIII had sat on.
Goodness.
That's King Henry VIII.
Could you explain exactly what your relationship? I know that you're a great grandniece, but how?
Oh, yes. Well, my great-grandmother, and it goes through that line. So it's my great-great-great-grandfather, Abraham Belasco, and David Belasco's grandfather were brothers. So I hope I made that quite clear.
More or less.
I was given the mic, so I'd just like to mention in a single sentence 3 very important people. Enrico Caruso, Pasquale Amato, and Emmy Destin. I think it was, Amato was the Rance. And I was wondering, do we know anything about their reactions to the production, if they ever talked to anyone in later years? There's that famous check, isn't there, that Caruso signed once for Rigoletto when he wrote on it, meraviglioso, referring to the performance for which he was being paid. So it's just an open-ended question, but those were obviously important people to the production.
I particularly will refer to Caruso. I think he enjoyed himself while he was doing. He probably made hundreds of caricatures of his fellow cast members, of the whole ensemble, 40 people trying to rehearse in one room. So I think it was a tremendous publicity, front page news, so that each of these actors and singers would be interviewed every day by an Italian or American newspaper, and so I think it was a really not that Caruso needed publicity or a boost to his career, but it was a triumphal event at its time, and so I think they were all. I think they were all probably remembered it for the rest of their lives as one of their triumphs.
We have some artifacts that Caruso created in the display case out there. One of which is that copy in a book of that caricature of the entire cast, but also a caricature that Caruso did of Walfredo's mother.
Yes, yes.
And that's out there, and the little statuette of self-caricature that he made as a laughing Buddha. And those are really fascinating things that we're very lucky to have on loan from the Toscanini family, along with the typescript that Belasco gave to him.
Your mother was actually ballerina at the Met at that time, was she not?
Yes, she had been at La Scala. This was funny. I mean, she had been at La Scala ballet school and at La Scala, and she had been ill. She had some illness and came back to La Scala and was walking in the corridor and met Gatti Casazza and Arturo Toscanini, who were on their way to be the director and conductor and she says, "What are you going to do?" She said, "Well, maybe I'll go back." She said, "I'll go back to the ballet school." And they said, "No, come with us to America." And that's how she got to be prima ballerina at La Scala, first at the Met in 1908 to about 12, and then after the war, she was there as the prima ballerina for all the 10 years or 12 years that grandfather was the supreme director of everything at La Scala. And then came the fascist. After grandfather left, they started to fire all the people that had been connected with grandfather's regime, and so she had wound up as a ballet mistress of the Scala Ballet School, but she was let go, and somebody's girlfriend from one of the fascist people got the job.
I should just mention also that I don't know of any comments of Emmy Destin about the production, but I've heard that Toscanini said about Emmy Destin, she looked like a cook, but she sang like an angel.
We have time for
remember an article by Gabe Dotto about the collaboration on the composition of Fanciulla called Opera Four Hands or something like that. So Toscanini had a lot to do. I mean, made compositional decisions, probably with Puccini's approval. Could one or more of you speak to that? The degree to which he really participated in the composition.
I haven't gotten to that point yet in my work on the new biography, so I hope I'll be able to answer that in a year or so. But so far, I'm afraid I can't answer that. Do you know anything about that more specifically than that they always worked together?
They always did work together. They had been just working on the final edition, which was made the official edition by Ricordi, and I know Puccini trusted grandfather to improve little things from a practical point of view, because he wrote him. He said, "Here's the final proofs for the Manon Lescaut score. If you think it's okay, I'll send it to Ricordi."
Yeah, wow. There's a letter where Puccini actually asks your grandfather to send Ricordi the changes that he had made for that Paris production in 1910 of Manon Lescaut, and he says, you'll do me a great favor if you send these corrections, or not corrections, but changes on to the publisher so that they can be incorporated into the new edition of the score.
Well, I'd like to thank all our panelists for giving us a wonderful talk.